Welcome to the Birding for Joy podcast, a show about discovering and exploring all the ways birding and wild birds bring joy into our lives. Throughout Season 4, we'll be focusing our attention on simple actions we can take in our daily lives to help birds and nature. I'm Candi Lynn Fite, your gracious host and joyful birder. If you're curious about learning how you too can live a bird-friendly lifestyle, grab your favorite beverage, settle on your perch, and let's get into today's episode. Greetings, dear listeners. If you've listened to the show before, welcome back. If this is your first time tuning in, I am so happy you're here. I hope this episode finds you all happy and healthy and finding precious moments to venture outdoors and spend time with the birds. Last week, I introduced the concept of planting natives to shelter and nourish birds, one of the 7 simple actions to a bird-friendly life from the Smithsonian's National Zoo and Conservation Biology Institute. I shared the reasoning behind the action and explained why birds, especially migratory birds, need our help. I want to be clear that although the thoughts and opinions expressed here on the podcast are mine, they are based on scientific evidence I have learned from the research of experts in the field of ornithology and environmental science. As a birder, I rely on the studies, findings, and data of scientists to gain an understanding and knowledge about wild birds and their environments. I wholeheartedly believe in the information I share with you on the podcast. I hope to reach others whose concerns about wild birds align with mine so that we can work together to discover ways to create change and help make a positive impact on the current state of wild birds. Research shows migratory birds are in trouble. In the last episode, we talked about the biggest threat was habitat loss. Yes, there are other threats, and we'll discuss those in the near future, but for now, we're focusing on how we can help with habitat loss. As I also mentioned last week, I am traveling to help my best friend during her knee surgery. When this episode airs, I will be in Minnesota. A portion of today's episode will include content from Season 3, Episode 4, titled, "This Garden is for the Birds." Let's tune in to some of that content now. This week, we'll focus on how to create biodiverse and sustainable habitats that will not only support our beloved feathered friends, but other wildlife as well. Our gardens can become bird sanctuaries with some effort and intentional practice. I use the word garden in the title of this episode for the searchable purpose. So when I say the word garden in the episode, that includes any piece of land, such as front yards, backyards, side lots, front meadows, yardens, a patch of unused yard, or maybe lawn that you want to transform. But say you don't have a yard. That's okay. These practices we'll talk about today can be done on a much smaller level, on a front or back porch, a balcony, or even a series of potted plants on the patio. Remember, whatever your effort to support nature might be, nature will always notice. And one other thing to keep in mind, you don't have to be a green-thumbed gardener to help the birds. Maybe you team up with your neighbors to create a biodiverse habitat between your spaces. Work together using whatever resources you have in the area. If I've learned anything in my 20-plus years of gardening, and most recently learning about the wildlife on our property, is if you offer it, they will come. Now let's consider the 4 main requirements of a bird-friendly habitat: food, water, shelter or cover, and places to rest, nest, and raise young. Every living thing on this planet requires food. For birds specifically, this might be insects, nuts, berries, fruit, seeds, sap, or nectar. Insects are extremely important in this list due to the fact that 96% of all land birds, even the nectar-loving hummingbirds, feed their young insects, which are packed with protein, moisture, and other vital nutrients. So when you're considering what plants to incorporate into your habitat,
Think like a wildlife lover and not a gardener. Bird friendly gardens need bugs. A valuable resource for all kinds of insects is deadwood. A deadwood pile can be kept in a back corner of the area. Your deadwood pile will double as a shelter space. As for plants, insects want the plants, trees, shrubs, grasses, and vines specific to their ecoregion. I'm talking about native plants. Ecoregion specific native plants are the foundation of any healthy biodiverse landscape, garden, or habitat. The logic behind this is that most birds rely on insects. The insects rely on plants, and the bird insect plant connection in any given area has a mutualistic relationship they've been working with one another for hundreds or sometimes thousands of years. Side note, while it's true some insects and birds also utilize non native plants, for the sake of this podcast and not wanting to start a native versus non native debate, I'll refer to those I'm learning from. If you'd like to do further research on the benefits of natives and wildlife, I suggest Doug Tallamy's books, Bringing Nature Home and Nature's Best Hope, which I will list in the show notes. Other than insects as a food source, you can plant native nectar plants along with berry, fruit, seed, or nut producing plants, shrubs, and trees. If you've ever witnessed an American goldfinch munching on dried flower heads of purple coneflowers or sunflowers, you will discover the willpower to leave them standing once they've gone to seed. One super great resource I've enjoyed exploring is the Audubon Native Plant Database. You plug in your zip code and voila, you have not only a list of region-specific native plants, but you can also purchase them directly from the site. There are several of these sites that can provide you with plant choices. Another favorite of mine is the National Wildlife Foundation's Plant Finder. I will add these links to the show notes. Going back to the Audubon's database, here's an example. The first plant that appears in my list is the American beautyberry, Calicarpa americana. How do I know that this is for sure a region-specific native? Well, because it grows in the woods near my home. It's a deciduous shrub that grows between 3 to 5 foot with an open growth habit. Once it leaves out in the spring, tiny pink flowers appear that attract butterflies and caterpillars. In the early fall, the shrub produces clusters of bright purple berries. The berry buffet feeds many creatures, but as for the birds, the American beautyberry attracts various wrens, orioles, sparrows, warblers, American robins, and cedar waxwings.
Let's take a moment to discuss how native plants and other areas of your yard can provide shelter for birds. Because let's face it,
Birds are easy prey. They must have areas to retreat to when it comes to hiding from predators or inclement weather. A shelter area can be many things, from trees, shrubs, brush piles, wood stacks, bird boxes, bird houses, tree snags, or dead trees. Pick a spot in your yard where you can be a little messy. Stacks of wood, a branch pile, and leave the leaves. As ecological horticulturist Rebecca McMacken says, they're called leaves for a reason. By the way, she has an excellent TED Talk called Let Your Garden Grow Wild that is so good. I will link it in the show notes. Shelter is a good segue into places to rest, nest, and raise young, because many of the shelter suggestions we've talked about provide both. Trees and larger shrubs are the perfect places for birds to rest, nest, and raise their young. Consider planting in layers, as in taller trees in the back or maybe in the middle, and then adding mid-story trees or shrubs, and then down to lower shrubs, and then plants. Offering a variety of taller trees, mid-story trees, and shrubs in your landscape will create places for the birds in your area to utilize. The more you have, the more birds you will attract. If you're starting from scratch or recreating a space for a more bird friendly habitat, referring to natives for your region is always a good choice.
Okay, now that we've established and hopefully gained an understanding that native plants have a tight relationship with wild birds, formed over many thousands of years, providing natural sources of food, shelter, and places to raise young, let's narrow our focus on a few ways we can incorporate natives into our existing landscapes. When shifting your yard or property to a more bird friendly habitat by planting natives, try not to get overwhelmed. Easier said than done, I know, but start where you are and what you have and improve from there. You don't have to do it all at once. The changes don't have to happen overnight. Instead of thinking you must do a complete landscape do over, where you have to rip everything out and trash anything non native, think transformation. Give your space a bird friendly makeover. If you treasure those beautiful tropical plumeria potted up on your back patio, nobody says you have to get rid of them. Keep them. I love succulents and cacti. Are they native to my region? No. Am I going to toss them in the compost pile? Also, no. But for every succulent, I can enhance my space by planting a bird friendly native. I also will not be removing the non native white Natchez crepe myrtles from my yard. But for every existing crepe myrtle, I can plant a native tree or shrub nearby. The point is, do what you can where you can. And when making new plant selections, think bird friendly natives. The National Wildlife Federation suggests that natives should make up about 70% of your yard or property. Other organizations might suggest more or less. I think this is a personal choice. Set a goal for yourself and your space and work with it. Our main objective is to plant native to live more bird friendly. One area of landscape that can be easily transformed is the lawn. Unless you have native prairie grasses as your lawn, chances are the grass in your yard isn't native and in most cases doesn't support wildlife. I'm not sure who I first heard say, lawns should be area rugs, not wall to wall carpet, but it makes complete sense to me. Not only is the concept of a green lawn, cut short and free from disease or insects, overrated, but maintaining one is also destructive to the environment and wildlife. I will admit, my grandmother's meticulous, sprawling lawn in Barrington, Illinois, was the talk of the village, envied by the neighbors. Not a dandelion to be found. My bare feet were constantly stained green, and the scent of cut grass takes me back every time. My grandmother prided herself with her lawn. Maintaining it was her civic duty, for goodness sake. But it also, along with many other lawns during those times, contributed to the environmental tragedy written about in Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. Birds and other wildlife don't need expansive, chemically dependent lawns. So let's work on reducing them and replacing them with natives. Remember last week when we talked about how caterpillars are the preferred food of wild birds for themselves and their nestlings? When choosing native plants for your space, consider species that are host plants. A host plant is a specific tree, shrub, or plant that an insect, butterfly, or caterpillar eats, lives on, or lays its eggs on. Host plants will vary depending on your region, so it's important to research native plants for your area. Don't forget there are several online database tools for these searches, such as the Plant Finder on the Audubon.org website. If you're on the hunt for native trees as host plants, remember, trees are the host with the most. You'll get more insects and caterpillars for your dollar by planting a native tree that supports them. The butterfly and pollinator gardeners out there may think I sound a bit sadistic to encourage planting natives to lure in the insects and caterpillars so that the birds can eat them. But that's how nature's checks and balances works. And trust me, they can't eat them all. For the next part, this is for anyone out here who container gardens, or for those who live in apartments or those who don't have yards. If you have room for potted plants on a porch or balcony, you can still plant natives to support birds. A tree or shrub will probably not be on your list, but native plants come in all sizes, and given the right amount of light and water, container native gardening can be quite successful. It doesn't require backbreaking physical activity, and you won't need large gardening equipment. They're also mobile. You can move them around your space, and it's especially easy if you place those containers on a platform with wheels. If you're interested in creating bird-friendly native container gardens, I will add a couple links in the show notes to help you. If you don't have a yard or balcony or porch, but you still want to work with natives to help support birds, consider volunteering at a community garden in your area. Other ideas would be to look into your area's botanic gardens and nature preserves. You could also help a friend or neighbor who has a yard, or you could even help design and create a native garden at a local school, park, or library. Next week, we'll wrap up the simple action of planting natives to help shelter and nourish birds. We'll discuss Doug Tallamy's Homegrown National Park project and how to start a bird-friendly native plant initiative in your area. Until then, I wish you well and joyful birding, my friends. If you are enjoying the Birding for Joy podcast, I would greatly appreciate it if you would subscribe to the show. Subscribing and tuning in to the episodes allows the algorithms on the platforms to know that the podcast is providing you worthwhile content and helps ensure the success of the show. Remember, the absolute best way to support your favorite podcast is by word of mouth. So make sure to share Birding for Joy with others who might enjoy listening. That way we can continue to build a joyful birding community. As always, thank you for tuning in, my friends.